So as I stop talking and just start to focus on how to clean up this mesh, the kind of fluidity of all the cuts and things becomes a little bit more apparent, and you can see how I'm starting to try and get back all the cleanliness of this polygon distribution while at the same time having all the proportions correct. So you can see I'm going from the kind of angles where I can get these loops flowing nicely, and I will have to go in later and do further work to get those lined up. But once again, because we've added in all this extra detail, I'm just trying to go in and make sure that all the edge loops are moving in the cleanest way possible. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you on this part of the car, it's obviously very flat. It doesn't go kind of in and then cut in. It's just a nice rounded surface, and when it hits that point, it just starts coming in. Whereas because I've got this edge loop that's so close, it's making my life much harder. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select these points. Sorry, I'm just losing my voice again. I'm just going to use edge constraint to slide those a bit closer. Then I'm going to select these points and move these a bit closer. So I'm just trying to space things evenly here. So you can see it's quite a boring process, but it is necessary, and you do need to go in, and every time you block out a different part of the car, just work your way through one by one, kind of cleaning up all these points. And this is probably the biggest difference I've seen in having a model that's perfectly clean and perfectly, how can I say it? It's got perfect proportions, but all sorts of bumps and pinches over it. So I'm just trying to figure out if having this loop running down here affects the way I'm going to model the surface. So I'm just going to cut that edge loop in because it is important, and merge these two up here. And I kind of need to consider how I want my topology to flow. And I think what I'll do is I'll connect it here, get rid of this vertice, select this vertice, connect it down, and then remove this point. But that may need to change. So at this point, I'm just trying to figure out the cleanest way to connect this little indent in the surface, because this is probably one of the more complex areas of the car where we've got a rounded surface, another rounded surface going this way, another rounded edge loop going this way, all kind of meeting up at one point on the surface. So you just need to have a look at that, kind of play with a couple of options, and make some decisions about how you're going to connect that off. And sometimes the easiest way to make those decisions is to just block out a kind of rough idea of how indented the area is and create the support loops to create the hardness here, and then go in and clean that up. So that's just what I'm doing now. Going to connect this point up here, unselect this edge loop up until this point, just so I can pull that out a little. Now I'm going to do the same and connect on the inside of this loop. You can see we are starting to cut that area into the car. So you can see now, because of the way I work, constantly swapping between show and result mode, I can use the absolute bare minimum of polygons to create some quite complex shapes without risking having a really messy surface. And if you do it correct, it's actually ends up making things so much easier, because there's just so many, it's just such a rounded, complex area. And if we have an extra 2 or 3 edge loops, it's just going to make life a living hell when we've got to go in and accurately get those kind of curves flowing. And it becomes near impossible, actually. And I've seen it so many times where guys jump in with too much geometry and have been lazy and just haven't bothered to clean those unneeded edge loops up, and the end result is that you think you've modeled the car correctly, but then when you see the reflections on the car, they're all wobbling and all over the shop. Just going to take another look at the car. Every so often, I'll just kind of reevaluate what's happening. You can see there's an edge loop flowing here that I haven't got correct. So from this point, I'm just going to continue it out and clean those points up whenever I do that. And all I'm trying to do at the moment is gauge exactly how I'm going to cut this indent in, because it is quite a complex area. So before I go in and just start randomly cutting things, I'm just looking at it from a few different angles, trying to gauge kind of how messy different parts are, as well as figuring out the best way to go about cutting in that vent. So probably the best thing to do at this point is just weld up and create this nice kind of hard right angle point, because I'm trying to figure out how to add all this venting, and I haven't even gone in yet and added in this kind of area here. So this is the next area I'm going to tackle. And you can see I'll basically just try and keep the geometry flowing along. It'll flow down, and that'll just keep flowing out. So to make my life easier, because I've gone in and added all these edge loops to support this kind of indented part of the mesh, I don't actually need those after this corner point. So what I can do is I can just get rid of them and not even worry about it for now, and just make my life easier so that when I go in and create all these connecting points, they're all aligned without having to manually connect all sorts of little details. See, I'm just making enough geometry to connect. As usual, I'm just blocking out the main edge loop. And then worrying about the other remaining details later. I'm just going to drag out these points back here and just start to block out the back of the car. And depending on what's making the most sense to you at the time of modeling, it can be a good idea to just jump back and forth between parts and just work your way through it. If you focus too much on one area, you sometimes lose sight of the bigger picture and forget how the topology needs to flow into other parts of the mesh. So that's why I'm just quickly going to go in here, and I've changed my perspective to view things from the back of the car, and I'm just going to kind of work those parts in. Sorry I'm not talking as much. I'm just trying to prevent my voice from fully losing. But I'm also trying to just let you see kind of how I work through different kind of complex tasks. Because in the next lesson, some of the things that I'm doing here, I'm going to show you on some more simple meshes. This is quite a complex mesh at this point, and I've gotten to the point on the card where we go in and start to detail these areas. It can be really complex and difficult to explain exactly the theory behind these things. So the best way I've decided to go about this is to show you in kind of real time how I'm doing it, and then to focus in next lesson on some more simple objects that take into account some of the workflows that I'm applying to this mesh. So now I'm just going to drag out this point here and just start to create that exhaust vent. If in doubt and you can't see through a certain point, you can either go Alt X, or I'm just so used to hitting F3 just to go wireframe mode, so when I'm dragging this point out, I can kind of see where it is in 3D space. Now this is quite a little complex area, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tidy it up. And what you'll notice is when you've got 2 points that you can't bridge because they're aligned kind of like a triangle, you'll see when I've gone to bridge that I actually can't. What you do is you shift drag up and then just weld the points. And then you've created that kind of loop. Just going to pull this in a little bit and connect these 2 points. Connect this point. And this point doesn't actually start to smooth out here. It smooths out a little bit more near the end point. So I'm going to connect these 2 up, select this edge, delete it, then select a border and cap that. And what I'm going to do to create the hardness on this point, I can just kind of select this edge, and without worrying about where this point ends up, I'm just going to go in and cut another point right next to it. So that support loop there is running along. And now we've created the hardness kind of seen in the real car. But it also needs to smooth out near the back here. So I'm just going to kind of pull these edges just a little bit further apart. And I'm just trying to consider at the moment what I want to do on this point, and I think because it needs to be hard, I'm just going to flow it around like this. And worry about this 5-sided point later. I could even maybe connect this point here. And at some point when I go in and add another edge loop here to harden this area off, I can clean that up. Or it's a little bit tricky. You can experiment. That's not exactly going to do it. We can't add a point along here. So sometimes it's best just to leave those. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to create the support loop around here. For this corner, we're going to need another edge loop extruded here. I'm going to connect a point there, weld that, remove the middle point, and now it's flowing around again. And I can continue that cut all the way along the edge here. Just going to drag that back. And this point I'll connect a little bit further down. I'm going to weld these 2 points together. So I'm not worrying about the topology further in here. All I'm worrying about is making sure that this edge loop, when I select it, rings around properly and accurately. So like I was saying, I've figured out how to fix that now. I can just target weld these points together and then remove this one. And there you go, I've gotten it back. I'm just going to go in and add one more edge loop to this area. I'm just going to continue this edge loop along here. And when I target weld that, I keep the polygon distribution flowing again. So to finish off the lesson, I'm just going to run through the last little bit of cleaning up this area that we've cut in, which is the most complex area of the car so far, and just kind of run through some of the last little things to notice. So what I can do here is I can cut down and I can connect this piece up here and then get rid of this excess geometry. Then when I get rid of this piece, I've cleaned up that whole area in terms of topology flow. And occasionally, after doing all the topology cleanup, just like to go in and double check once again and make sure that things are lining up to the blueprints. And now that I've moved this point up to be a little bit more accurate, I can just connect here and worry about the polygon distribution after I've added in the cut to this surface. can see going back to the philosophy at the start where once I've moved a point left or right, I try and keep it there, and instead of moving it left or right here, once again, just go up and down. Just kind of reiterating what I was talking about earlier in the first couple of blueprint lessons. This is where I'm just zooming in at a really fine level and just making sure that all the edge loops are kind of roughly the same height apart on the vertical here. So you can see zooming in at that kind of, just going to turn off symmetry here. Zooming at this level, sometimes you need to go into turbo smooth and just add a third one. And what I'm doing is here is, because our polygon distribution isn't flat, it just goes kind of horizontal and then in, it's creating too much of a pinch. So what I need to do is I need to pull that down and possibly even add a support loop underneath, so that when this smooths off, what I can do is I can pull it out and gain back a little bit of that rounded shape instead of that sharp 90-degree angle. So sometimes you will need to go in and do that. And that triangle that we had before, you can see that just really nicely rounds that off. But I'd probably, just to clean it up a little bit more, go in and add an edge loop along here. Just to create, you can see the difference of it rolling off, and then adding it gives you that bit of detail. So now we've got a whole bunch of points that aren't really being terminated here. So for some of these, what I can try is I can merge these 2 points and then get rid of that last one. And what that's done is it's created a square polygon, a four-sided polygon that's flowing really nicely. But when you do that, probably a good idea is just to drag this point back a bit so you bring in a little bit more square shape to the polygon. It's just going to smooth out your geometry that little bit more and give you that little bit of extra detail that you wouldn't have had you kept it perfectly flat. So now I'm just moving in and moving these points until I get it where I want. Same thing's going to apply for this point now. I can just merge these. It's created a nice clean point. So as I'm modeling, just slowly, one by one, all these points start to even out, start to become a bit cleaner, and you can start to see the intentions of modeling this low res. And if you do just put in that work, just kind of one by one, cleaning up these points, you will end up with a nice clean mesh. So I can push this in, cap this off. And I can sit here trying to clean up these points kind of one by one all day. But the power of correctly blocking all this stuff out has meant that in that last little bit of time, in that last kind of 10 minutes, you start to get a really nice low res clean topology, and it's so easy to adjust later on. There's obviously a ton more work that's needed on this car, but I've applied the same theory and principle to all parts, and you can see in just a matter of time, say if I put 2 or 3 days of work at my current speed where I'm trying to go slow enough where you can see what I'm doing, you'd have most of the car blocked out. And if you really wanted to cane at it and go as fast as you could probably bash it out in a couple of days. Because I'm limited for time in the tutorial creation process, I've kind of got to pick and choose areas that I think best show off different techniques and methods for cleaning up parts. And in this lesson, I've tried to cover one of the most complex areas and show you how, even with really low topology, if you do things right, you can end up with a really nice clean result. So this will be the last lesson where we're working on this car. Mostly because I wasn't really happy with how the blueprints were working out, but also because there's quite a few hours of content now and I thought it'd be time to get a free lesson out next. So in that lesson, to describe kind of what's going to be happening is you'll see different areas of the car that have different types of topology and that flow into each other differently. I'm going to try and tackle those areas in more simplified objects just so that you kind of have it ingrained into you how to solve problems like this. And when it does come to having to do these types of cleaned topology areas in more complex areas, you've gotten so used to the process behind them that it happens naturally. To a beginner, creating topology like that is quite advanced, but it's not exactly complex. It's just, as I found with anything I found with the boxing, you go through a learning curve where you make things out to be much more complex in your head, and as you begin to master things and figure things out, you simplify everything you do. It doesn't become more complicated, it becomes more advanced, but you try and keep things as simple as possible. So I've always taken kind of great pride in my models, knowing that they're as low res as physically possible, so that when I do pass them on to other guys in the production line, they know that they're going to be rendering something that's as easy as possible to work with when it comes to UVing it, texturing it, or rendering it. So as usual, I hope you really like this lesson and where the course is going. We are going to change things up a little bit as I go on, and I'm not sure exactly yet what the next project will be, but I've had quite a few guys asking me now to share a kind of course curriculum and yearly outline. But the honest answer to that is I think we're a little bit too early. There's going to be so much content that I can't really predict exactly what's going to be in each lesson yet. And there will be at least 20 lessons. And as these lessons progress, they'll probably become longer and longer, because during the modeling process, I can't show you how to do everything in, a 10 to 20 hour course like V-Ray. It's going to require a lot of kind of boring sitting and watching different areas that I'm cleaning, or that I'm designing, or that I'm kind of developing in real time. And if I don't do that in real time and just take off little snippets of projects like I'm doing here, you don't get the full benefit of the course. So the next lesson will be out next week, and that will be a free one. Thanks heaps, guys, and sorry I'm losing my voice a little bit. I just tried to save it a little bit there at the end of the lesson, and I'll catch you next time.